had always been fascinated by old, abandoned houses. There was something about their decaying walls and forgotten histories that drew me in. So, when I heard about the old Thornton house on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to see it for myself. The Thornton house had been abandoned for decades, ever since the last of the Thornton family mysteriously disappeared one night in the 1970s. The house was left to rot, its windows broken, and its doors hanging off their hinges. It was the kind of place that local kids dared each other to enter, but few actually did. One chilly autumn afternoon, I decided to pay the house a visit. I had my camera with me, eager to capture the eerie beauty of the place. The sky was overcast, and the wind howled through the trees as I made my way down the overgrown path that led to the house. The house loomed ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the gray sky. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. As I approached, I could see that the inside was even more decrepit than I had imagined. The wallpaper was peeling, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. I stepped inside, my camera at the ready. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, shattered glass, and rotting wood. I began snapping pictures, moving from room to room, trying to capture the house's eerie atmosphere. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I paused, listening intently, but the only sound was the wind rattling the broken windows. I shook off the feeling and continued exploring. I reached the staircase at the center of the house. The steps were covered in dust and creaked loudly as I ascended. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding, before continuing to the second floor. The upstairs hallway was narrow and dark, with only a faint light filtering in from the broken windows. I moved cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The doors to the bedrooms were all closed, except for one at the end of the hall, which was slightly ajar. I approached the door slowly, my pulse quickening. I pushed it open with a creak, revealing a bedroom frozen in time. The bed was unmade, its sheets yellowed with age, and the dresser was covered in a thick layer of dust. But what caught my attention was the mirror on the wall. It was large, with an ornate frame that was surprisingly well preserved. I stepped closer, my reflection coming into view. But as I looked into the mirror, I noticed something strange. The reflection wasn't quite right. There was a shadow behind me, something dark and indistinct. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, save for the decaying furniture and the oppressive silence. I turned back to the mirror, my heart racing. The shadow was still there, but now it was closer, almost as if it were reaching out toward me. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. I knew I had to leave the house, but my legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot. The shadow in the mirror continued to grow, taking shape, becoming more distinct. It was a figure, tall, with long, spindly limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. In a panic, I turned and ran for the door. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I heard something behind me. A low, guttural sound, like a growl. I didn't dare look back. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste, and sprinted out of the house, the door slamming shut behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the property, my lungs burning and my heart pounding in my chest. I turned back to look at the house, half expecting to see the shadowy figure in one of the windows. But there was nothing, just the silent, crumbling structure staring back at me. I never went back to the Thornton house after that day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me inside, something ancient and malevolent. The photographs I took were unsettling, with strange shadows and blurs that couldn't be explained. But I couldn't bring myself to delete them. They were a reminder of the horror I had encountered, a proof of what I had seen. And sometimes, late at night, I dream of that house. In my dreams, I'm standing in front of that mirror again, and the shadowy figure is there, closer than ever. I can't move, can't scream as it reaches out, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. And I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. There's an old house on the edge of town that everyone avoids. It's been abandoned for decades, but the locals still talk about it in hushed tones, warning each other never to get too close. They call it the Mercer House, named after the last family to live there. The Mercers were a reclusive bunch, keeping to themselves, except for the grandmother, Agatha. Agatha Mercer was an odd woman, even in her younger years, but as she aged, she became downright terrifying. People claimed she practiced strange rituals, communing with spirits and delving into dark magic. She was rarely seen outside the house, and when she was, her appearance sent shivers down the spine of anyone who encountered her. She was tall and gaunt, with wild white hair that framed a face full of sharp angles and piercing pale blue eyes. When the rest of the Mercer family mysteriously vanished one night, no one was particularly surprised. The townspeople figured Agatha's sinister practices had finally caught up with them. But Agatha remained, alone in that house, until the day she died, or so they say. After Agatha's death, the house was abandoned, but strange things continued to happen. Kids who dared each other to enter reported hearing whispers, cold drafts, and the sound of someone walking with a heavy limp. But the most disturbing stories came from those who claimed to have seen Agatha herself, still roaming the house, her ghostly figure flickering in the darkened windows. I never believed the stories, or at least, that's what I told myself. But one Halloween night, a group of friends dared me to spend the night in the Mercer house. It was a foolish dare, but I didn't want to back down. I grabbed a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and a few snacks, and headed to the house just before midnight. The house loomed ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking ominously in the wind. I pushed it open, stepping into the musty, cold air. The floor was covered in dust, and the smell of decay filled my nostrils. I set up my sleeping bag in what had once been the living room, just a few feet from the massive stone fireplace. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their eyes seeming to follow me as I moved. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease settling over me, blaming it on the stories I'd heard and the eerie atmosphere. As the hours passed, I explored the house, using my flashlight to illuminate the dark corners. Every room was filled with old, broken furniture, the remnants of a life long gone. But there was something off about the place, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I decided to stay downstairs, unwilling to venture to the upper floors where Agatha was rumored to have spent most of her time. I returned to the living room, trying to settle in for the night, but sleep wouldn't come. The house was too quiet, and every creak of the old wood made my heart race. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, listening. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the living room door. My flashlight flickered, the beam of light growing weak. I aimed it at the door, my hand shaking. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind. But then I heard a voice, low and raspy, like the sound of dried leaves rustling in the wind. "Who's there?" it whispered, the words sending a chill down my spine. I didn't answer, too terrified to move. The voice came again, this time closer. "Why are you in my house?" The flashlight flickered again, and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled with it, desperate to get it working, but it was dead. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the sound of heavy, uneven footsteps entering the room. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, just the power of suggestion, but then I felt it, a cold hand brushing against my shoulder. I recoiled, scrambling to get away, but the room was pitch black, and I stumbled over something on the floor. The footsteps followed, closer and closer, and I could hear the raspy breathing now, as if whoever, or whatever it was right behind me. I backed into a corner, my hands shaking as I tried to find something, anything, to defend myself. Then I saw her. Agatha Mercer stood in the doorway, her tall, skeletal figure silhouetted against the faint light coming from the cracked windows. Her white hair was wild and matted, framing a face that was pale and gaunt, with hollow, sunken eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. She smiled, revealing yellowed, crooked teeth. "You shouldn't have come here," she rasped, her voice like the scraping of metal on stone. I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. Agatha stepped closer, her eyes locking onto mine, and I could feel the air grow colder with each passing second. My breath came in ragged gasps as she raised a bony hand, reaching out toward me. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of centuries, as if she were commanding rather than asking. Something in me snapped, and I bolted. I sprinted through the house, crashing through the old furniture and tripping over debris. The front door loomed ahead, and I threw myself at it, yanking it open and stumbling out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was back in town, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. My friends were waiting for me at the edge of the woods, their laughter dying on their lips when they saw my face. I never told them exactly what happened inside the Mercer house, and I never went back to that place. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear her voice in my dreams, calling to me from the darkness. And every time, I wake up with a start, the memory of Agatha Mercer's cold, bony hand reaching for me, pulling me back to that cursed, abandoned house on the edge of town. There's a house on the edge of town that everyone calls the Doll House. It's been abandoned for as long as I can remember, standing tall and forlorn with its peeling white paint and cracked windows. The yard is overgrown, choked with weeds, and the rusty swing set out front creaks eerily in the wind. But it's not the house itself that gives people pause. It's the stories about the little ghost girl who supposedly haunts it. The Doll House was the site of a tragic accident decades ago. The family who lived there, the Moores, had a young daughter named Emily. She was only 7 when she died in a fire that consumed the house late one night. Her parents managed to escape, but Emily was trapped inside, never making it out of her bedroom. After the fire, the house was left to decay, and the Moores moved away, too heartbroken to ever return. But Emily never left. I had always been fascinated by the house, despite, or maybe because of, the tales that surrounded it. People said that if you stood outside at night, you could see Emily's face in the windows, watching and waiting for someone to play with her. Others claimed they had heard the sound of a child's laughter drifting out of the house, even though no one lived there. One summer night, after hearing one too many stories at the local diner, I decided to investigate the Doll House for myself. It was just after midnight when I made my way there, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a camera, determined to capture proof of the paranormal. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the house. As I approached, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and making the old swing set groan. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. I hesitated at the front gate, feeling a sense of dread wash over me, but curiosity pushed me forward. I crossed the yard, the weeds tugging at my ankles, and climbed the steps to the front porch. The door was slightly ajar, and with a gentle push, it creaked open, revealing the dark, musty interior of the house. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The house was silent, save for the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the distance. I shone my flashlight around, illuminating the dust-covered furniture and the peeling wallpaper. Everything was frozen in time, as if the house had been waiting for something, or someone. I moved cautiously through the rooms, my heart pounding in my chest. The air grew colder the deeper I ventured into the house, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking loudly in the silence. At the top of the staircase was a narrow hallway, lined with closed doors. I knew that Emily's bedroom was the last door on the right. My hands were shaking as I reached for the doorknob. The door swung open with a soft groan, revealing a small, dark room. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam sweeping over the remnants of a child's life. A small bed with a faded pink blanket, a wooden dresser covered in dust, and a dollhouse sitting in the corner, its tiny furniture arranged just so. As I moved closer to the dollhouse, something caught my eye. A photograph lying face down on the dresser. I picked it up, blowing off the dust. It was a picture of a little girl with curly blonde hair and bright blue eyes, smiling shyly at the camera. Emily. I felt a chill run down my spine as I set the photo back on the dresser. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, and I could see my breath forming small puffs in front of me. I turned to leave, but then I heard it. A faint giggle, like the sound of a child playing hide and seek. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound came again, closer this time, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I slowly turned back to the dollhouse, my heart pounding in my chest. The tiny door of the dollhouse had swung open, revealing the miniature rooms inside. But what sent a jolt of terror through me was the sight of a tiny figure standing in the doorway. A doll that looked exactly like Emily, right down to the curly blonde hair and the pink dress. The doll's head slowly turned to face me, its painted eyes wide and unblinking. My blood ran cold as the giggling grew louder, echoing around the room. I stumbled backward, tripping over something on the floor. My flashlight flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a low, soft whisper. "Come play with me." I bolted out of the room, my heart pounding in my ears. The hallway seemed longer, darker, as if the house itself was trying to keep me inside. I reached the stairs and nearly fell as I raced down them, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the railing. As I reached the front door, I heard the soft patter of footsteps behind me, like a child running down the stairs. I didn't dare look back. I burst out of the house, the door slamming shut behind me with a final, resounding thud. I ran all the way back to town, not stopping until I reached the safety of my own home. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. I knew I had seen something impossible, something that defied explanation. I never went back to the dollhouse, and I never told anyone what happened that night. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that soft, childlike giggle in my dreams, and I wake up drenched in sweat. The image of that doll's unblinking eyes burned into my mind. And I know, deep down, that Emily is still waiting in that house, longing for someone to come and play with her. And that one day, she might find someone who won't be able to leave.